Thanks y'all for coming out on when the weather is like so nice you could be outside in it. Thanks Rita, and congrats on the book. And thank you Malvern. This is like my favorite place to read because there's no microphone, and I'm not one of those people that's comfortable with microphones, and you get a podium. Not everybody gives you that. I didn't have anything like finished and new that I wanted to read, but I've been working on this book forever, and so I've got like a kind of a chapter that's a little bit more finished than some of the other ones, so I was going to read from that. The book is about my father dying mostly. It's also about just fatherhood and alcoholism and violence and mortality, and it kind of starts out about a decade earlier. Like books about mortality, they always start with hospitals, so this is going to be about a hospital. Chapter 2, St. Elizabeth's. The voice was feeble, raspy, a dry, discarded husk. "Help me," it said, "help me." I could see into the woman's hospital room from the hallway. The blinds were drawn against the winter gray. A thin, bony arm raised up from the sheet. She seemed barely human, impossibly ancient. "Help me." I looked up and down the hallway. They still had Christmas decorations up. A nurse hustled by, looking like she had someplace more important to be. A tired mother lugged an armful of flowers and dragged a couple of teenagers behind her, in Red Sox caps and winter coats, bored, shuffling along. They went past the woman's room. They didn't know the woman. I didn't know the woman. I looked around again, wondering if I should find help. "Help me," she said. And then I kept walking. Already I was learning, if they are not your family, they are not your problem. This was St. Elizabeth's, St. E's, they call it in Boston to sound like St. E's, E-A-S-E, I guess. I want to say it was the geriatric ward, but you go to any floor in any hospital in the country, and it's all the geriatric ward. It's all old people waiting to die. My grandmother was 2 rooms down. She slept, if you could call it sleeping. Sometimes she moaned. Her breath gurgled in her throat, the result of accumulating mucus. It's a sign of the end stages of death, or the beginning stages of death. I don't really remember. I don't know if I knew that then, actually. I hadn't read that book about how to die yet. I was new. I was learning. I had the odd feeling I was being tested, being taught something I needed to remember. My mom and her brother and sister were there. They were exhausted. I asked what was wrong with Nana, and Mom rattled off a few symptoms, a few vital signs. "But what's wrong with her?" I asked. "What did the doctors say?" "Well, I don't know. We haven't talked to the doctors." I'm an engineer by trade. I build software for a living. I take it apart. If it's broken, I figure out what's wrong with it, and I try to fix it. If I can't, I ask somebody else to take a look. Big software systems are like living things. They have all these moving parts that may perform simple tasks or complex tasks, but when you put a few thousand simple and complex components together and make them talk to each other, if anything goes wrong, you get chaos. So you sit down and you turn on some logging, or you run a trace program. You want to see which one of these parts is moving out of turn, or running too slow, or sending emptiness where there should be somethingness. If you have a theory, you try to test it. And maybe the test leads you to a better theory, or maybe it leads to a dead end. But somebody has to look at what the damn thing is doing and try to figure it out. "We haven't talked to any doctors," my mother said, as if the idea had never occurred to her. Nana's room was semi-private, which is hospital speak for you have a roommate in a tiny space the size of a college dorm room, and they are probably as sick and as whiny as you, which is to say, not in the least bit private. Her roommate was, naturally, an old woman, who, unlike my grandmother, seemed to be awake at all hours and was in constant vocal need of assistance. "Nurse!" she yelled incessantly in this god-awful northeastern accent, so it came out like, "Nice! Nice!" Her husband sat with her, listening to her yell, telling her to be quiet. He was a white-haired guy in a winter coat and scarf that he never took off, with a hat that he wrung in his hands. "Why don't you get me the nice?" It seemed like this was the extent of her treatment. She yelled "nice" to nobody listening, and her husband twisted his hat in his hands and told her to pipe down. After an hour of her wailing, I wanted to put a pillow over her face. I think her husband would have helped me. I still didn't understand my grandmother's situation. So, is Nana dying? My mother couldn't say. She could barely understand the question. She talked about secretions, and then about how she has the medical power of attorney, but it's a Catholic hospital, the implications of which were still lost on me. My grandmother's husband hung around and didn't say much, and my mother complained about him to me, and complained about his money, and reminded me again, she has the power of attorney. "Mom," I said, "what about the doctor?" "Well, they don't tell you anything, do they?" If this was software, the first thing you do was look at the server logs. My mom, my aunt, my uncle, the worry, the bags under their eyes, the stress, they looked like tweakers, aging tweakers in their 60s. My grandmother started to choke in her sleep. A nurse showed up, said something about secretions, that word again. And a minute later, a guy rolled in a machine with dials and buttons and a big vacuum hose on it and asked if we could step outside. He said he was a respiratory therapist. Well, that's a good sign, I thought. We all left him and the nurse to it. From out in the hall, the sounds were horrifying. It was the week between Christmas and New Year's, and all the real doctors were off. I always thought hospitals were 24/7, but it seemed that the doctors who could figure out what is going on and make decisions and order up some treatment were the doctors who didn't have to work the week between Christmas and New Year's. During that week, all you saw was a sparse parade of interns, fresh-faced and earnest, and seemingly clueless about things like dying. If you wanted a real doctor, you had to be in imminent danger of death, like code blue, like ready to go off right this minute. If you were only toying with the idea of dying sometime in the next few days, well, the real doctor will be back on Monday after the holiday and can take a look. The next time the nurse came around, I said we wanted to talk to a doctor. I said, "We have questions." She looked at me like I'd raised an objection during Sunday Mass. "Excuse me, who are you?" My mother grabbed my arm and said, "This is my son, and I have the power of attorney." She clung to that power of attorney like it was the only thing keeping her tethered. The nurse took a deep breath. I was just one more damn thing she didn't need on the day she had to work during the holidays. And she looked at my mom. "I'll leave a note for the doctor to come talk to you, ma'am." And she left. The doctor was an intern, obviously, in her late 20s with a face that in any other setting would have been comforting. But today, we needed a business face, a get shit done face, and hers was not it. My mother and my uncle tried to ask some questions. The intern squirmed out of saying anything definitive. I interrupted. "So what exactly is the prognosis?" She said, "Excuse me, who are you?" My mother said, "He's my son, and he speaks for me." The doctor rambled about secretions, about hydration, about feeding and respiration, and I interrupted again. "So what is the plan? Is she dying?" She said the doctor could answer questions like that on Monday and talked again about secretions, and if she's not dying, what is the plan? Do we expect that she will get better and go home, or do we expect that she will lie in this bed and have her secretions vacuumed out indefinitely? She said the doctor could answer questions like that on Monday, and can you tell me what's wrong with her? She said the doctor could answer questions like that on Monday, and aren't you the doctor? She shrugged. She wanted to escape. She just wanted to finish her residency and go be a private practitioner somewhere where she wouldn't have to spend the holidays listening to a bunch of crap from another family who didn't know how to look at an old lady and see she was just dying. There's nothing wrong with her except she's dying because she's old, and when you die, your body just gives up, and this is what it looks like, for Christ's sake. Towards evening, Nana choked on her secretions again, and the respiratory therapist came back. The family went out in the hall, but there was no nurse around, and the therapist asked if I wanted to give him a hand. He was a good-looking Latino guy with black framed glasses and close-cropped hair balding on top. Nana wasn't quite conscious, but she was choking on gunk in her throat every time she took a breath. In fact, it seemed like she was struggling to breathe at all. The therapist unwrapped a couple of sterile attachments, affixed them to the hoses, and applied some ointment to them. He leaned over my grandmother. Mary, can you hear me? I need you to lift your neck a little." "She's deaf," I told him. "She can't really hear you." He said he just needed to suction her throat out a little through her nose, and he needed me to keep her calm. Then he snaked the attachment, which was way longer than I realized, slowly and steadily, without pause or mercy, into her nostril. She moaned. Her hands waved around her face. "It's okay, Mary," he said. "I'm just going to put this in here a little way." "I told you," I said, "she's deaf. She can't hear you." "I need you to keep her hands away from her face," he told me. And he pushed it the rest of the way. She screamed, and whacked at the hose with her hands, hammering lamely at the therapist's arms. He lost his patient demeanor. "Hold her hands, man. You need to hold her arms." I grabbed both her flailing, frail skin and bones arms in my fists, and I held on tight. And I yelled in that talking to Nana yell we all did ever since she started losing her hearing. "It's okay, Nana. It's okay, Nana." The therapist wrestled the catheter in even deeper, and the machine sucked out mucus, and her eyes flew open. Her eyes of German blue steel, now wide with panic, coming out of whatever dream she was in and seeing me for the first time in years. She stared at me, and I don't know if it was pain or shock, or if she even knew who I was, or if she recognized me and wondered what awful dream was this, that Raymond was in this terrible place and not back home in Texas. What I felt at the time, in fact, what I still feel, is that she woke up in great pain and saw her beautiful, smart, kind grandson squeezing her wrists in a vice and screaming at her while he drilled her face. When I left for the night, the old woman in the next room was still awake. "Help me, help me." I kept walking. No one was going to help her. Not here.